Hello out there, Guitar Moderne lovers. Hope you're all doing well. Tim Brady exists in that rarefied world of people who compose quote unquote modern classical music for guitar or that includes guitar. He's a fine guitar player himself. He's usually playing as part of the compositions. I flew up to Montreal. He flew me up to Montreal to see his 100 guitar, one of his 100 guitar compositions where he had might have it that one might have been 200. I'm not sure. In a big church, it was spectacular. And we had a great conversation at that time. This was a couple of years ago, and I posted that on Guitar Moderne. You should go check it out. We talked about all sorts of things in terms of modern classical music and composing for guitar in the context of modern classical music. He's a great guy. He's a gear nut like the rest of us and loves talking about it. While many artists and guitarists and many of us were using COVID to kind of relax, regroup, slow down, he apparently used it to go full tilt into putting out a 3 CD box set, which I highly recommend that you pick up. I'll do my best Vanna White here, as I do in the video. But this is a terrific set. One record is him playing solo with looping, and on that record also he plays with members of his quartet. They did improvisation remotely, and we talk about how that was done. The next record is him and his quartet with virtual orchestra. It's basically samples that he played, and it sounds amazing. And then the third CD is with voices, a piece that he composed for voices and guitar, and another piece that he had performed live years ago with voices, to which he added samples and some extra guitar using the original live recordings as a bass, sort of like Frank Zappa did on some records. The whole thing is amazing and worth listening to, and he's been busy doing other things, as we will discuss. So I think you'll really enjoy this interview. I also want to, as always, thank my sponsors, Red Panda and Earthquaker Devices, both makers of terrific pedals. Here's my Red Panda T-shirt. So without further ado, please dig in and enjoy the Tim Brady interview. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, the thing to discuss is what what you've been doing on your COVID vacation. But most people have been or many people I found, have been using it to relax and to regroup and to, take a break. And it seems like you've gone full tilt boogie and done these huge projects. So let's start with the record, which is amazing. Okay. A 3 volume set, with solos, group, orchestras, voices. What prompted you to take on such an ambitious work?
Well, there was two things. One is I had actually for several months before the COVID crisis, I had a few solo guitar pieces, small little things, and I had ideas for others. So I was thinking, and it had been 10 years since I'd done a solo guitar CD. So I'd been thinking, no, it'd be fun to do a new solo guitar CD, but I had no idea when I was going to find the time. And so all of a sudden COVID showed up. I had a bunch of shows that are canceled, some touring that was canceled, a lot of projects postponed. So I had the time. So it was really, I had been thinking about doing a solo guitar CD. And the COVID, especially April, May, June last year, there was just nothing going on, nothing. So I figured I might as well do it. So that was where that one. The second CD, the improvisational CD, that one came about completely just cause. I've been working with Helmut, the violin player, and Sean, the tabla player, for about five years. We only do like a couple of shows a year, but we always have huge fun. And because it's a completely improvisational ensemble, it's super easy. We actually have a rule: never rehearse, never talk about the music. We just show up, we walk on stage, we play, we leave. That's how it works. So it's easy. but I just had this idea. So because of COVID, we couldn't do gigs for a year and everything. So I just came up with this idea. Well, what if I used us as three soloists with a virtual orchestra? And literally, I don't know where the idea came about. I guess the fact that, we'd been working on some projects and the projects got postponed or canceled. So I wanted a way to continue to work with these two amazing musicians. And so I just came up with the idea. It took me a couple of weeks to write the orchestral part. It's all sampled orchestra. Obviously, the cost of using a real orchestra would have been literally close to $100,000. And during COVID, not that I could find $100,000, but even with $100,000, you couldn't have done it with COVID anyway. So it's a virtual orchestra, but the virtual orchestras sound very good these days. And the whole point is the improvisational interaction. So that one just kind of showed up out of nowhere because I had the time and I wanted to continue working with Helmut and Sean. And then the third record was actually, I mean, those are both two archival performances that I've been wanting to put out for several years. And I'd done a few passes at remastering them. But with COVID, I had the time to really do that final listen, and you go, well, we need 0.5 dB at 3.5K, and we need, that type of insane, subtle type of stuff that we're, and so I just put it out as 3 CDs. As the phrase goes, nothing succeeds like excess. I think that was also part of it.
Well, let's go back and start parsing this. Before we do, let me see if I can do my best Vanna White. It's backwards here. I don't know if it's going to be backwards when
it looks fine to me.
Oh, it does. Okay, so it'll come out. But yeah, this is the set. I ended up with 2 because I think your publicist sent me one and you sent me one.
I think so, yeah.
So I'll give it to some deserving person. But stepping back, the first CD has you doing solo stuff, but doesn't it also have you in a quartet?
Yes, the last piece on the CD is a quartet. It was a quartet that was commissioned by a local music platform called Pan Am 360. And they commissioned a video from us in April 2020, just as things were getting crazy. And it was and we did it's a nice enough video. It's been seen a few times, but there were 1 or 2 little mistakes, and I wanted to remaster it. So once again, I did a little bit of tweaking from the performance that's on the video. Changed. There's a few little parts of my performance I changed. Wanted a slightly different timbre, remastered it for audio. So because it's a nice, it's one of those pieces, the website platform called me up and said, oh, we want to do a video with your quartet. And I said, great. And they said, we want to do it in like 3 weeks. It's like, okay, so I have to write a piece and record it all virtually in like 2 weeks. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, we'll try. And everybody was, nobody else had anything else to do. So the quartet had the time to, because it's not rocket science, but you have to create a complete click track for the piece and write out all the music, and then it syncs with the click track. And then everybody has to record everything via the click track, and they send the audio files, and they say the video files later, and you then sync the audio and video files. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of musicians have been doing this for the past 18 months. So I'm not giving away any state secrets, but it's not a hard process. It's just long and laborious.
Well, I'm curious. Yeah, I've been seeing so many of these over the last year and a half, and I'm curious about the details of it. So when it's written, that's fine. Everybody plays their part to a click track, and you can sync up. You start the click track from this one. But is anybody at any point in this particular performance listening to any of the other parts? Did you do them all separately and just put them together, or did somebody do one and then somebody did their next one?
No, everybody did their parts separately, but I did send everybody. Nothing succeeds like excess and over preparation. I sent everybody 3 click tracks, and they could choose which one they wanted to listen to. I sent them the click track, just a pure click track, and also the other thing I do, I actually give the bar numbers in the click track. So it's like, so if they're like if they're at bar 85 and they make a mistake, they don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. They can actually say, oh, I just start again at measure 85. And in their ear, they hear someone saying measure 85, 86. So I gave them the click track. I gave them the click track with a simulation of their part only. And then I gave them a click track with the simulation of the whole quartet. I don't know who used what. But I gave them 3 options because different players, they feel more comfortable doing different things. what did I do? I can't remember. It was like a year and a half ago. I can't remember what I used. It's actually in a weird way. You probably play more precisely with the click track and the simulation of the whole band, because you can actually hear how your part fits with everybody else. So I probably did that. I probably played my part with the whole band, but I can't remember.
That's interesting because it varies. I mean, I've done remote recordings for people where I prefer listening to what the band is doing, and then there's some where I prefer listening to click track because somebody in the band isn't quite on and it's throwing me off.
Well, with carbon-based life forms, you have these problems. With silicone-based samples, you don't have the problem of anyone getting off. I
Right,
mean,
that's true. Yeah,
so that with the sampled version, no one's going to be out of sync. I mean, it's a bit dry and static rhythmically.
right.
But so as I say, I sent them the 3 click tracks. I have no idea who used what, but they all did very good work. And they sent me their sound files. I would, there was the odd attack where, you kind of nudge the attack over this way, nudge the attack over that way. Cause I mean, it's, we're not in the same room. And even with click tracks, it's very hard to kind of play musically. So it's weird in the editing process. I've been thinking about this because I'm doing some more recording right now for another project. The recording and editing process has become kind of like a replacement for the intensive rehearsal and performance practice that we usually have. Usually we rehearse for 20, 30 hours, or, especially in the old days, like 40, 50 years ago, when musicians got to play a lot, club dates and all that. So you could hone your craft by playing 10 weeks in a club and then go to the record. Nobody can do that anymore. So in a weird way, the digital technology allows us to fine tune our expression, but we're just using a different technology. It's probably not as much fun.
Oh, you just froze. Oh, hello. You
Oh,
froze
you
there.
froze too. Are you okay now? Let me just open my door. It might help. I've got pretty good Wi-Fi, but I sometimes opening the door clears up. So yeah, no, the quartet, I'm happy with that, and we have a new quartet record coming out next year, which we recorded in last August under lockdown, so that'll be out next August. I mean, it was ready. Actually, it was ready. I was thinking of making a 4 CD set because it's done.
Yeah.
But then I realized that the record, the quartet record, first off, it's better to stagger releases a bit. I mean, there's just so much stuff out there. But also the quartet record has none of my music on it. It's actually about music by 4 other composers who I commissioned. So this is more coherent. It's like the 3 record set. It's quite varied, but it's all my music. So at least there's a through line. Adding the 4th record would have destroyed any sense of through line. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So
yeah.
for the solo stuff, you mentioned looping somewhere in the.
Yeah.
So what did you use for looping?
It's nothing dreadfully exotic. I have 2 very simple loopers, stereo ditto, and the Electro Harmonics 360, their stereo looper pedal. One of the advantages, though, in this, I've done a lot of looping live and everything, and you learn how to loop live and everything. But in the studio, if it took me 10 takes to get the right loop, I do 10 takes to do the right loop, or 15. And the other thing which I did, which you can't do live, but which is nice about the studio, is I would do a bunch of like loops that had to be very rhythmically tight. I would do them together. But then textural loops, I would actually add on a completely different track, which a completely different loop. So that means in terms of the mix, I could have like 3 or 4 different, like my rhythmic loop might be here, kind of my textural loop might be here, and more melodic loop might be there, which makes for a more interesting experience than just everything being straight up stereo.
Right.
And the other thing I like, the rhythmic loops obviously have to be quite precise. But then if I do more textural loops, live, you end up having 1 looping duration. I'm not going to buy that big boss thing with 3 loopers. Life is just too complicated to carry around 3 loopers. But in the studio, you can have the rhythmic loop, which is very tight. And then you do the textural loop, which actually has a different duration. So as the 2 loops go past each other, the relationship between the 2 parts is continuously evolving. Like if one loop is 4 seconds longer than the other, you know, if the textural loop is 4 seconds longer, then every time it loops, it's actually looping in relationship to a different rhythmic part, which once again makes for a kind of a more varied listening experience. So I wouldn't just make just one big loop of the whole piece. I would divide it up. Rhythmically tight loops are one loop, but all textural loop and all melodic loops tend to be separate loops and separate tracks. So, and that, the thing I like about that, it's not as much fun as performing live, but I can get a more precise realization of what I'm actually hearing in my head. Because you know, if you're lucky, every once in a while with a looping performance, you get a great performance. But loopers, you know, you're hitting your foot and everything. Almost every performance, there's one loop that's not quite exactly what you like it. You know, it's just like, ah, oh, it's a little early or a little late, or it's a little loud, or it's a little, and live, you can't really change that. Whereas in the studio, I can really kind of do the balance that I'm looking for. So that was the looping. And
were they parts? Were they written? Was this written, composed music, or were you improvising?
I would consider it composed music. I have scores for everything. I mean, I have this here. I'll show you. I do eventually get it out into proper notation. But when I'm writing for guitar, how the heck is this? All right. I actually do things still by hand because it's quicker and faster. And so what it is all notes. All the ideas are clear. You can see there's notes on the page. But what I do is because I've been playing this music for so long, and because, you know, I've worked so much as a composer and improviser, I actually have these things where, like, here's a weird example. I have this little motif, a 3-note motif, and then I say, vary position across all pairs of strings. So I know exactly what it's going to sound like, but I don't have to write everything out because I know the material and I know how I'm going to vary it rhythmically. So to me, it's completely notated music, but it makes use of the fact that I, you know, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we're guitarists. We all know how to noodle and just keep things going. It's like, that's what we do. That's our job. So I don't write everything out. Some stuff I leave to, it's kind of like in Baroque, in a way, it's a peculiar analogy, but in Baroque music, you know, they have figured bass. They gave the cello player or the gamba player and the harpsichord player this figured bass, and they had to fill in everything. And that's what kind of this is, like a figured bass is like, well, here's the idea and here's what to do with it, but I'm not going to write everything out, just do it. So in that it's composed, but it's not, the notation is not full traditional Western notation. It's a combination of the term that is often used now, which I use, it's called text notation or instruction-based notation, where you tell people how to make the music. You don't, and therefore you get the idea you want, but you don't prescribe to them the actual notes. You tell them how to find the notes. So in that sense, it is composed.
Well, I mean, composition has become a continuum
Oh yeah,
of late. I mean, it's everything from writing out every expression, expression symbol to, a drawing of a bird,
yep,
and
yep.
so it's still considered composition. On track 4 has some great grainy distortion on the ambience. I don't know if you remember specifically, but I was wondering if that was a plug-in or a pedal.
No, I do everything with pedals. I knew you were going to talk to me, and I can't remember which board I was using for this record. I have 2 boards. My big board, neither of them are massive. You know, it's like we're not getting into who has these monster boards. What's his name? Vernon Reed has supposedly one of the biggest boards ever. It's like he's got like 7 huge boards.
I'm not surprised.
But he possibly has a bigger road crew budget than I have. So I have 2 boards, and one board just has a Strymon Sunset, so that has overdrive and distortion, but with some some variations, and the other board has a Chase Bliss Brothers as the overdrive, and then it has a Analog Man modified DS1 as the distortion. I can't remember which board I was using for the project. So, but those are my only tools that I use for distortion. The other thing I do, which all my guitars have a lot of different, like all my humbucker guitars are equipped with not coil tap, but parallel series buttons.
Yeah.
And my single coil guitars all have boost buttons. So I can play a lot with the output level of my pickups. And I find that's a tool that, I mean, people talk about it, but the average guitarist doesn't work on that, play with that enough. And so you can really get textures if you're using your full output humbucker, or you're going from to parallel and putting one pickup in parallel, one pickup in. So I play a lot with the output levels as much as I play with the distortion.
Well, especially with overdrive. I mean, we may have
Oh
discussed
yeah.
this last time. It's gonna affect it. But what I'm talking about, it sounds like somehow the reverb is coming before the overdrive. You know,
Um,
because
I'd
the
have to listen to the piece. My reverb are always after my overdrive, but it might be some of these, some of these crazy H9 sounds are pretty intense. And
right.
so it's probably one of those crazy reverse H9s or weird convolution reverbs. What's the name of that track?
Well, I don't know because it wasn't coming up on the. Oh well, it
Oh,
should be on the wait. It should be on the
because if you can tell me.
CD. So the uh, solos and quartets. So 4 would be at Sergio's request.
At Sergio's request. Okay, now that I can tell you about. I remember that. That was recorded. That was recorded on this guitar. With humbucker, and I remember that it was treble pickup, full humbucker. These are not super high output; they're medium output. One of the things, and it's subtle, but this guitar needs a fret job, so the high end is a bit pingy, and that's partially what you're hearing is the sound. And I noticed it on that track, and I kept it in. I could have redone it on a guitar that didn't need a fret job, but I actually like the high end that ping. That's a that was the Strymon Sunset with distortion and overdrive close to pegged. Like both of them at about 80%. And that's a plug-in. It's not a plug-in. It's an H9 algorithm called Ultra Tap. It's a delay line with 64 taps on it, and I set it super long, and so it ends up sounding like this. But it's more complex than reverse delay. So the idea is that it creates these it's huge dense wall of sound, which is a sound I don't do all the time, but I do love that kind of type thing.
Yeah, it's that well. Yeah, I guess when I wrote out the questions, I wasn't looking at the thing, but track 5, which is 60% just water.
Right.
Yeah, that has something that sounds like spectral processing on it.
No, it's all my complex processing is just coming out of H9.
Okay.
I own actually 4 H9s. I have 3 of them on my board, and I have a spare one, and I lend, and people in my quartet have H9s, and I loan them to my quartet. I am a big fan of the H9. I think you have one on your board, so it's an impressively powerful unit. That's the H9 setting where you add. I believe it's a version of what they call shimmer, where it adds a reverse upper octave to the sound, which is, I suppose it is true. It's a form of spectral processing. It's not a plugin; it's just an H9 algorithm, but it's a reverse. And you can, one of the things about the H9, or especially nowadays, you can really transform the parameters so much that you can find the sound you're looking for, as opposed to just like, oh, here's a preset delay and everybody sounds the same. You can really, that's the thing I like about, I mean, I've been doing programmable stuff for many years, but the H9 is probably one of the most flexible in terms of programming. And that's why I've, for the past 4 years, I've used the H9 a lot, is because it allows me to create sounds that are my sounds. I actually have this bank of sounds. It's called Tim's H9 sounds. It has 36 sounds on it. I'll use other sounds, but when I'm working on a project, I just go 36. I have these 36 sounds, but I have like 3 H9s, so I can really mix and match and move around. And I've got like these quarter tone sounds, these weird spectral sounds, and I've created all these. But some of them are like just, oh, a beautiful chorus sound or a nice trem sound. So, but you can really design the sound to suit your imagination. It's very flexible. They're the end of my ad for Eventide.
Yeah, it's an amazing bit of kit. Speaking of ads, that was a Godin Les Paul style guitar, right?
Yes, all my guitars are Godins. I'm just a Godin kind of guy. The one thing I will point out, I bought it partially because look, what does it make you think of? I'm sure you can.
The Jeff Beck maroon Les
Oh,
Paul.
but to me, it's more George Harrison's Revolution.
Oh, okay.
And this came originally, Godin doesn't have a pick guard on it, so I added the pick guard partially because I like the pick guard for my technique.
Huh.
But it was like, oh, I want a guitar that looks a little bit like George Harrison's Revolution guitar. But it is in many ways my favorite guitar. I mean, I have actually, it's not, I have two favorites now, but for short scale, this is my absolute favorite. And this thing, I got push pull series parallel,
Right.
and it's amazingly flexible with the push pull series parallel.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can't sound like a Strat, but you can get that density.
Sure.
So,
And you maintain the hum canceling. Parallel is something most guitar players have slept on, you know. I mean, it doesn't sound exactly like single coil, but
it's about 80% there though.
yeah, yeah. But neither does the split coil on a humbucker usually. So it parallel seems to err more on the side of being closer to the humbucker, and split coil errs on the side of being thinner than a single coil.
Yeah. I mean, parallel. I mean, it does. It's not. No, it's not a single coil. It almost gets close to the P90 thing. It's kind of more a P90 than a single coil, but it's a little thinner than a P90. But so it's like it's kind of between a P90 and a single coil. But I love it. I really I have several guitars, and they all have these variations on the series. And Godin like series parallel. This is a guitar I got in last November because it's a very weird guitar they made. It's you can see it's a 3 pickup, but it's short scale, Gibson scale with a Strat style layout. But what Godin is, it's got a 5-way switch, and positions 2 and 4 are parallel. So it's actually got the series parallel thing built in.
Yeah.
So no, I whenever I talk to guitar players, if they ask about gear, one of my first things is get a series parallel switch if you have humbuckers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great idea. And Godin too. I mean, I just reviewed the Montreal Imperial, one of their Montreal Imperials for guitar player, and it's just you know, they're one of the most underrated guitar companies.
Well, yeah, and I got to show you here. We're getting into it, but I haven't had a good guitar gear schmooze for a while. This is the one I got most recently. This is called the Summit AE.
Okay.
And this is my favorite guitar because it can do literally anything. Okay, you know, it looks like a Les Paul, right?
Does it have a block?
What?
Is it fully hollow, or does it have a block?
No, it's semi-hollow. Just the top is hollow, but it's got a 25.5-inch scale. So it's a Les Paul with a 25.5-inch scale, and it's got a piezo. So what it does, it's I just keep playing and going, it fits everywhere because it's just amazing tone machine. If you turn it, the tone control all the way up, it doesn't sound like a Strat, but because of the long scale, it kind of has that transparency that the long scale has without the quackiness because it's a Gibson style body. But if I turn the tone control down to about 5, it actually starts to sound like a Gibson. And then if I turn the piezo on about 20%, it adds the low and high end, which single coil start to get. So this thing, it doesn't sound like a Gibson. It doesn't sound like a Fender, but it's quite subtle, but it has an amazing range of textures you can get out of the thing. It's just so much fun to play. And even the woods they chose, because it's got a mahogany neck and it's got a mahogany back, but it's got a swamp ash top. So it's like, it really is this, you know, it's a 335. It's a Gibson. It's a Tele. It's a Strat. But they hit it out of the park. It's just so. It has this great sound. It plays beautifully. Although I'm doing
standard model, or was that custom built? Is that a standard?
No. This is a model they make. It's called the Summit AE. AE for electroacoustic. I have not seen any reviews of it on the internet. I think it's a total sleeper. This happens with me with Godin all the time. They put out a model, I buy it, I go, man, this is the best guitar ever. And a couple of years later, they go, and nobody was really into it, so we're withdrawing. Obviously, my interest in what is a great guitar is perhaps not the same as most people's,
Yeah.
but it's an amazing instrument. I love it. But what I'm always looking for in a guitar is the ability to have a great variety of textures. I don't care if they're Fender textures or Gibson texture. I don't, that kind of, I obviously understand and know, and I'm interested in that history of the instrument, but that's not my thing. But I do need something that can, vary from very dense to quite thin. The other thing, that has a treble bleed on the volume control. So when you turn the volume control down, it actually gets quite thin. And so it's amazing. So I can get really thin, very sparse. If I put in the piezo and turn the volume down, it almost starts to sound like a telly. And then you turn the volume up and you take off the piezo and you go to the bridge pickup and it's like a Les Paul, almost full tilt. So it's very flexible. So yeah, so that's those are the tools of the trade. Although currently, here, I'll just finish the last tour. I'm recording a new project, which may be a CD, but it might end up being a video, or it might just be a live show. This is their version of a Strat. It's their high-end version. It's called the RG3, and it's got lace sensor golds in it, which I really like. And it has this, what they call this high definition revoicer. It's basically like it changes from passive to active pickups. It's a bit of it's a high upper mid boost. And I don't use it much live, but what I find, because I'm doing direct recording, I've got amp simulators and everything like that. But what I find is that if you do this slight upper mid boost, it actually records super well. It records better than the flat guitar. It kind of is almost like pre-EQing it. This is so I don't think I'll ever use this one live, but I've actually, like 60% was recorded with this guitar. It records direct extremely well.
That's the tune 60%, not 60% of the record.
No, the tune, the tune. Although maybe it was 60% of the record as well.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like an Eric Clapton Strat.
It is. It's inspired directly from it. I mean, the only, and this is, I mean, you're a guitar nerd, you're a nerd. The only slight difference, and you can feel it a little bit, like in a Strat, your 3 pickups are all suspended in the pickguard, right? But in this one, the bridge pickup is actually mounted on the wood, so it's not suspended in the picker. So it actually has a bit more kind of connection, and it's a bit more. It's just the tiniest bit more output and a bit more aggressiveness, because it's connected to the body as opposed to just being in the pickguard. But I mean, we're talking probably a 5% difference.
Right. Yeah. Everything makes a difference. And as to your liking specific different guitars than other people, I mean, you do have what Liam Neeson would call a particular set of skills, and you do. I mean, you're not making music that's supposed to sound like other people. So
That
once
is
you
true.
enter that, you're just looking for tones and textures that work
Yeah.
for what you're doing. I just thought I'd mention that, because that is a specific thing, and it's a rare thing. So yeah, you answered. On track 9, Virtuosity of Time, which is, I guess that's with the orchestra, movement 4. There's something that sounds like an organ on there.
Oh, I mean, if you basically it's pretty simple. If you put a fair bit of distortion, not killer amounts, but a goodly dose of distortion, and put a big long delay with some detuned chorus, and use your volume pedal to get rid of all the attack, the guitar can sound quite organ-like. And I think I might have used a tiny bit of adding a little bit of the upper octave, like 10-15% of harmonizer, so you feel it more than actually hear it. And so then it starts to sound like an organ. And I mean, I do
tones from from the drawbars.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I mean, I'd have to look at my notes to see exactly what I did, but I use that texture often enough that I have a sense of what you're going for, what you're hearing.
So the orchestral stuff, did you say you were doing that with your improvisational quartet and with the orchestral sounds?
Yeah, what we did for the orchestral CD, I wrote as I say, I'm not even sure where this idea came up from. I remember one morning I woke up and said, "Ooh, I should write an orchestral piece for me, Sean, and Helmet." It was like, it was just, and then and because COVID was going on, there's nothing else to do. So I sat down at my computer and just started composing. And like a couple of weeks later, I had this 40-minute orchestral score with, which I put together with samples. And then I didn't send the whole 40 minutes. It's in 4 sections. And I sent, like I'd send Helmet, okay, here's section 1. And I actually really didn't tell them much what to play because it's improvisation and they're musicians with like amazing ears and huge amounts of experience. So you don't need to tell them when to play and what to play and when to give space. They know all this stuff. So they would listen, and there was no click track because the music is either very unpulsed, in which case I don't want to, or when the music does have a pulse, the pulse is so obvious and it's improvised. So they would do, so I'd send them each movement. I'd say, okay, here's the movement. It's a slow movement. Do a couple of takes. So, each of them they tend to do 3 takes of their improvisation. They would improvise and they would imagine like, Helmet, interesting. You brought this up earlier. Helmet wanted to hear our improvisations. So like I did my improvisations first. So there was nothing else. Then Sean added his on the tabla. And then by that time, and Helmet was starting to come in. Helmet said, "Oh, can I hear your 2 improvisations?" For me, I didn't need, but everybody's different. So he would work, kind of react to our improvisations. Sean, I don't think Sean interacted with my improvisation. It was for Sean, he was interacting rhythm, the percussion part, directly with the orchestral part. And then they would send me 3 takes, and basically I did some editing between the takes, but it wasn't like I didn't like take 10 seconds of one take and then 10 seconds. No, it was like, oh, I'll take the first 5 minutes of this take. The next 3 minutes are better from the other take. I tended to try and keep as much as possible the integrity of each improvisational performance. Once in a while, I would cut between 2 performances in big blocks, but I didn't get down to little micro edits. Partially because I didn't need to. They're such good improvisers. They play great. And the
But
other,
part of that but that's interesting because I mean, I'm curious if you never ran into sections where they were improvising something and you were improvising something, but those 2 things didn't go together.
um, no, we'd kind of worked out the one thing I had worked out in advance where people were supposed to have their major solos.
Okay.
So it was like I did have a bit of a roadmap, but sometimes I would say this is going to be a duo, and I wouldn't tell them what to play. But when you're supposed to be playing a duo, you just approach it differently than when you're playing a solo. So we did have it mapped out. I say, okay, here's a big solo for Sean, here's a big solo for Helmet, here's a big solo for Tim, here's a free improvisation with the trio, here's a duo. So I did give people that, and I can't remember because it was like over a year ago. So I gave people ideas, but often, you give them ideas and oftentimes they're improvising and they just ignore the ideas and they just play through the duo as a solo or play through the solo as a duo, and sometimes you get some good takes out of those things that are technically wrong. But it wasn't that, it was actually for a big complex project. It actually went together relatively painlessly, largely based, I think, on the experience of these musicians. And also one of the reasons we started playing together about 5 years ago, there was this weird gig I had and I just wanted to do something easy and quick. And I said, oh, I kind of know Sean, I know Helmet. We'll just improvise together and whatever. And we'd never done it before. And we just started improvising this little gig, like 10 people showed up, but we went, wow, we all think the same way. We know exactly what's going to work with this other person. It was like instantaneous. It was just so weird. And so that's why we just keep playing a few gigs a year, because it's so much fun to play with someone where you have like 100% confidence in their ability to react in a really interesting way to whatever you're doing. So I had that confidence going in with this project. So I didn't do a lot of hand holding.
Well, it's interesting because I've heard maybe 2 or 3 projects like that of people improvising together, but remotely, meaning
Yeah.
that, they put their parts on separately. And I don't know how they were all done, but usually what they would do is one person would lay down just, I guess, the whole tune, and then the other person would react to that. And sometimes they'd switch for another
Right.
tune. Or, Henry Kaiser's been doing it through the cuneiform video channel. He's been doing these videos of him improvising with people remotely over the last year, and I just find it fascinating because you think of improvising as as ensemble, as people listening to each other and reacting, and there's been a whole new method of doing it that's come up in the last year.
I agree. I mean, people had started to hint towards this before the, using this combination of, well, Miles was doing this in the 60s and 70s. A lot of, I mean, everybody kind of knows this with Teo Maceo, the producer, a lot starting from the mid 60s, like 65, Miles, Smiles, and they would do these huge long sessions, and then they would edit the thing together. So that's why there's one of my absolute favorite Miles Davis record is 1965 Miles Smiles. It's got like footprints on it, and
Yeah.
it's got all the classics. But doing some research, that's a heavily edited record. It's not like live off the floor. And so in that sense, Miles, as with many things, he was like 40 years out. He was way in advance. He realized that improvisation combined with studio technology, editing and mixing becomes actually a new compositional art form. Because instead of generating the material via notation, you're generating the material in real time, but using recording technology, you're then manipulating it like a composer. So I think it actually, I mean, with this piece, I was quite happy with the result. And I can see other pieces where I've done a bit of it in the past. I can see, but it is potentially a very strong medium. What the thing I think one of the things about it is that it maintains the inherent, what's the word I'm looking for? Humans, even if they're great players, we're always a bit messy. There's a little bit of noise, a little parasite. It's never perfect. It's a human performance. And one of the problems of digital technology is sometimes it starts to get too perfect, and too perfect becomes less interesting to listen to. So this use of improvisational source material with its inherent imperfection, and then you can manipulate it and create a new structural and emotional idea using digital technology, gives you the control of digital technology, but maintains the inherent messiness of the human music making process.
Yeah, it is an interesting combination. Your guitar playing on the orchestral stuff, a lot of it is how did I put it? Sounds unleashed, Uh, and I was curious if any of that had to do with, reaction to your situation at that time.
Um, I don't know what goes on in the subconscious. I can't tell you what's going on in my subconscious because it's subconscious. I would say that the Sean and Helmut are both extremely rhythmic players. Both of them are like beasts when it comes to rhythm. So it really forced me to, and I'm a pretty rhythmic player, but I also like textures and blah, blah, blah. So knowing how rhythmic their playing was, I kind of said, okay, it's like, if I'm playing with these guys, I got to do it. So I kind of really worked focused on making the rhythmic element in certain solos. I really focused on making the rhythmic element a very, very important part of it. I must admit, I've done this a few times in my life, played with large improvisational ensembles or large ensemble. But there's something, it's like, even though it was just my headphones, it was like an orchestra of 75 musicians pushing me forward. And it kicks you pretty good in the patootie when you got 75 musicians. You got like 10 brass pumping out the chords and 35 string section of 35, 40 strings grinding out the chords. It kind of gives you a different sense of what the rhythmic possibilities are. But I must admit, I was quite happy with those improvisations. I haven't recorded myself improvising. I do it every day, but I haven't recorded it for many years. And I was pleased with the results. I'll be honest, not everything is the first take. There might have been a few retakes, but there's not much editing. Generally, my solos, with few exceptions, I would just rather do a new take than, oh, the first the first 30 seconds was okay. Now I'll do the next 30 seconds. It's like, if I'm going to get into that type of detail, I might as well just write the part out.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very intense. And that was going to be one of my questions. How much fun was it to play over that kind of orchestral
Lots.
power? Yeah, and I could see how that would inspire that kind of aggression and intensity.
Yeah.
How was Revolutionary Songs put together? You said that was some older stuff, but then from what I gathered from the notes, you then added guitar to stuff.
Well, it was more a very extensive remastering. Revolutionary Songs was recorded in 1995, so that's like 26 years ago. And it was the first big chamber CD I'd done, and we did a very good recording. And it was put out in 1996 on a Canadian label called Just in Time Records. The wrong label for the music, unfortunately. But anyway, I was not basically I didn't have as good mastering ears then as I do now, and so we didn't do the mastering was not as good as it could have been. And we've myself and my recording engineer, who's been my recording engineer for now 32 years, so kind of most records are really collaborations. About 12 years ago, I said, oh man, I really want to remaster this. So I slowly started remastering it. I added there were one or two very minor mix mistakes on the guitar and the piano, which I corrected, but they were incredibly minor. Like there was one piano note that was missing. And so I pulled in a sampled piano note and put it in. And some of the guitar sounds I re-EQ'd quite radically. But we didn't remix it. I was just working on the stereo masters. But I added, it was really simple. I mean, we added a little more compression, a little more limiting, added a little more reverb on it, but very discrete reverb. But we really worked the EQ big time, and I'm very happy. It really sounds exactly the way I wish I'd figured this out 25 years ago. I don't think it would have changed my life, but I was just very pleased with the result, because it is one of my favorite pieces as a composer. It's an interesting piece as a guitar player, but it's mostly me as a composer. The guitar is just one instrument among several. It's not like this huge. It's really a vocal piece. But I do think I like the melodies. I like the structure of the piece. I like the theme of the piece, the variety of textures. And so I'm pleased that I was able to do the proper remastering, and so people can hear it the way it should have sounded 25 years ago.
Yeah, on the 12, it has kind of a gamelan feel to it.
Yeah.
Was that an inspiration in there?
Not specifically, but I mean, gamelan music is very rhythmic, and I'm actually very interested often in very rhythmic music. So I think it has to do with the gamelan feel, has to do with this obsession with rhythmic feel and kind of overlapping phrases, which gamelan does a lot. I mean, I've never studied gamelan music, so I'm not an expert, but it's of interest to most contemporary composers find something interesting in almost every music. So I would say it's sort of it's more that overlapping phrasing, which is the point of that we have in common.
I think we may have talked about it. As soon as you add guitar to that equation, you start getting a King Crimson type.
As I say, everybody says, "Oh man, you must have listened to lots of King Crimson." In fact, I've listened to very little King Crimson, which is so weird. But as I always say, give someone a guitar, a volume pedal, and a delay line, and ultimately we all discover the same thing.
Yeah, it's true. Um, yeah, I wrote something here that I don't understand what I was saying, but I said the music evokes a certain kind of disorientation,
Yes.
which I guess. Oh, I was thinking I was referring to As It Happened,
Yes.
that music, because that's about these CIA experiments or something
Yes.
conducted where they basically ruined people's minds,
Yes.
and I thought the music really worked well to evoke that kind of sensibility.
I appreciate that, and that was when I wrote that piece. I mean, it's a very dramatic story, and it's setting a radio interview to music, which is kind of weird in and of itself. But I want to capture that sense of, I mean, just a horrendous experience. You're in an involuntary capacity. Someone destroys your mind. It's wrong. It's literally criminal. But on a personal level, it must be just so, you must be so lost and at sea and have no idea where where to start building your life again. So I wanted to somehow try and get, especially the first movement. The first movement, that whole thing. I'll tell you a very quick story about that piece. That was the most complex MIDI production I ever did. It was in 1999. And I had a really high-end Yamaha sampler, and I was driving the whole thing via MIDI. That was a phenomenally complex score. Is they were like MIDI, and I use samplers, but I refused to use any store-bought sample. I literally made every sample myself. Every sample on that record is a recording of me playing guitar, which then I trimmed, put into the sampler, and drove via MIDI. It was just nuts, the work I put into that. And it's the most complex electronic score I've ever done, and I'm pretty sure I can tell you it's the most complex electronic score I'm ever going to do, because I just don't have the energy to do that MIDI stuff again. But the weirdest thing about that, which I allude to in the notes, but and it's in quad. The initial thing, the tape part is in quad, and the band's on stage. It's very complex production, which we only did 3 times. But the day we were doing it in Montreal, it was 2000 or 2001, and we were in the theater, and we were doing the sound check, and there's 2 percussion and tape, and we hadn't thought about it. I don't know why we hadn't thought about it. Maybe we should mic the singer. So we started the sound check, and immediately it's like the singers can't hear a thing. And Morris, my sound guy, says, we should probably mic the singers. And we all went, oh yeah, but how come we didn't think of that? There's like tape to. And fortunately, his house was literally only about 500. He lived like 4 blocks away from the concert hall. So he just ran home, got some microphones, and he said, oh, I might as well bring my Alesis ADAT machine, just my 8-track machine, just for the hell of it. And so he just brought the ADAT machine down and plugged up the microphones, and then he just said, I'll do the percussionist. I'll put as a stereo pair, and I'll give each of the singers one track. He plugged the microphones in, zeroed everything, hit the record button, and never listened to anything else. He did not do a sound check. He didn't do a line check. He didn't do a level check. 9 years later, I randomly ran across this tape, and it said, as it happened live. And so I phoned up Morris and said, oh, do you still have your ADAT machine? I said, yeah, I still have an ADAT machine. We found and it was like, and we both listened to it, it's like a perfect recording of a perfect performance. And we did no line check. We did no sound check. We did nothing. It was like, to me, it's like just unbelievable. The stars aligned. And so about 10 years ago, I started slowly remastering that piece. I didn't have to change much, and that's the other thing, is that's a hard piece. And those singers got it literally perfectly. Like there's not a wrong, I didn't have to correct a note. It's amazing. And so, but to me, and then so we, I added the voices, and then I added a few more new electronic parts, and then I added the spoken voice. But finding it took me many years. I'd listen to it and then I'd go away for it for like 9 months and come back and listen to it again. Finding the balance was very tricky, because it's a very dense piece. I usually don't like music that dense, but I think for this, because of the subject matter, kind of that overwhelming, I wanted the experience to be overwhelming, especially the first movement. And so to overwhelm, you have to kind of, nothing succeeds like excess. So to get the mix where everything was, I could hear everything, and yet it still had that incredible density, that took a lot of listening. And I'd play with one voice up for like a half a dB or 1 dB, and then listen to it for half an hour, and then change the EQ one day, the type of stuff and it took me years to get that. So I'm very happy I got that out there, because it's a unique piece technically and aesthetically in what I do, and I'm very happy to have this weird, amazing live performance.
So it's a combination of that live recording and stuff you added afterwards.
Yeah, the tape part is studio, and that was done beforehand, a little bit afterwards. But all the percussion and all the voices are live.
Wow. Yeah, I think that, as I was saying, the density works because it just fits the subject matter, and it's hard to do that without it turning into just cacophony.
It took me years of listening and mixing to get it to that point, to be honest.
But in general, and it is different from your music, because in general, you find this terrific balance between dissonance and beauty. You manage to get
Thank
those.
you. That is, in fact, what I am actually looking for. And if you catch that, I'm very happy.
Oh yeah, to me, well, I'm familiar with it, because to me, it, I love that concept, we may have talked about that. As a friend of mine used to say, it's all about the squeezing and the letting go,
Yeah.
you know, and it's that rub that makes for interesting emotional music. I mean, if it's just dissonant, as some modern music can be, it's all tension for me and no release. And if it's just beautiful, it can, dip into schmaltz, which I have a soft spot for,
Oh man.
running back to Steve and Edie Gourmet. But
Oh well, there, we all have this is a weird little aside. There's a radio show on the local radio here, which my wife and I discovered a few months ago. It's on Saturday nights, and they play like all the elevator music from the 50s and 60s, and all the dentist waiting, like Mona Lisa, men have named you, and Andy Williams, and we turn it on. It's like, oh man, it's so pretty.
well, I mean, that stuff varies, and a lot of it, I grew up with it. I mean, I grew up with Andy Williams'
Yeah.
show and Steve and Edie on Ed Sullivan.
Oh yeah.
So I have that soft spot for it. But it's funny. I don't know if you know this guy, Rick Beato.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I see. He's got an interesting website and YouTube channel.
his channel, and he did this thing, the most complicated pop song ever.
I haven't seen that video, but I saw it on.
Well, it turns out it's a song that I've loved for years. It's this Sergio Mendes soaring, operatic duet between, male, female duet that I have loved for years. But when he analyzes it, I mean, it's changing keys every 5 bars. It really is supremely complex, which to me makes it more than just somebody singing a pretty song. And when you mix beauty and dissonance, I mean, the Scandinavians have been great at this, for years. I mean,
Yeah.
they have no. I remember those records. Trying to remember, who was it, Arnold Anderson or uh Mascalero. They had a group called Mascalero, and where they would be doing beautiful Norwegian folk songs, but somebody would be playing kind of weird guitar over it. And
Sounds great.
yeah, it's pretty great. Yes, this guy Frode Alneas, a Norwegian guitar player who became like a TV personality and stopped playing guitar much, but he was a great guitar player. Out of the Terry Ripdell school, as many of
Right.
them are, but he had his own take on it. Um, but yeah, that kind of stuff really works. We may have talked about this in our lengthy interview up in Montreal, about how classical music, especially modern classical music, there isn't a lot of that going on. It seems to be either kind of dissonant or Philip Glassy, repetitive, non-melodic, or there is some romantic stuff. I mean, I have I guess he's a second cousin. He's a cousin of my wife's, Daniel Ott, who's a modern composer, teaches at Juilliard, and his stuff tends to be more towards the romantic.
Right.
And he occasionally talks about that's a rough row to hoe in modern classical, because it seems the prevailing, I think we talked about this last time, the prevailing thing seems to be leaning towards minimalism and or dissonance, as opposed
Yeah.
to any kind of prettiness.
No, you're right. But I realize the older I get, this kind of the two albums that basically set in stone my belief that music has to have this scope. It's the double whammy of Sergeant Pepper's followed by Double White. You listen to those two records and you realize music is not this, it's that. And it's impossible to not listen to. And those two records showed up I was an adolescent just getting into music, and I wore them out, as the phrase goes. But the older I get, the older I realize that being introduced to the idea that music is this very large toolkit for expressing what humans are, and that the idea of a very narrow, specific technical language has certain historical and cultural rationale for it and everything. but especially now, with the interconnectivity, I mean, interconnectivity began with music notation. Once music could be written down, it was already starting to be porous. And then when we invented sound recording, it became even more porous. And then when we invented editing, it became more porous. And then with the internet, now music is completely porous. So the idea of trying to maintain this narrow vision of what music is doesn't seem to me, it's never resonated with where we're at as humans and as human society. So and I know I can trace that back to Sergeant Pepper's and Double White.
Well, yeah, I mean, on those records, they definitely, I mean, certainly on Double White album, they definitely had stuff that was pretty and stuff that was
Oh yeah.
noisy. But the concept of making the two work together, I think that's something more modern. And I think it's not, I think it's becoming, I like to feel it's becoming more accepted, that there are more people. Like there's a great guitar player out of Knoxville, a friend of mine, Mike Baguetta, who plays kind of out of the David Torn school and can be noisy, and uses his whammy bar to pull the notes out of pitch almost to a major degree. But at the same time, he'll record things like Lonely Town by Ricky Nelson, and I think he did a Roy Orbison tune, and just with these beautiful melodies that he will warp and play them to where it's almost like you're listening to a slightly warped record playing it.
Right. No,
You know,
I love that approach. I do that. Well, I do that fairly frequently myself. It does seem to scratch an itch.
and brilliantly, I might add. Have you heard anybody? I mean, in terms of the trend, have you heard anybody else doing this kind of thing that you've gotten excited about?
Funnily enough, during COVID, I've been actually spending whenever I have free time listening. I'm listening to. I tend to listen to two things. I'll listen to Miles Davis a lot, just old Miles Davis stuff especially like from the Bitches Brew, the late '60s, early '70s, because I didn't know that as well. It's the period, well, it was just before he kind of went out of public life for 4 years and everything. So I didn't know that. So I've been listening a fair bit to that and discovering that. And of course, McLaughlin's on guitar, but it's really not about the guitar. The guitar becomes more of a thing when Mike Stern joins up again. McLaughlin, when he was more about texture than about virtuosity. And I've been listening to a lot of like straight up 20th century classic. Like I listen a lot to Bartok and Shostakovich and with these score following programs. So I've actually been listening more to kind of traditional composer repertoire. I mean, the one thing there are just so many good composers and so many good musicians now. Like I do a bit of teaching. I have some, students, and they've got so many tools at their disposal. And you see on, every once in a while, on my Facebook, someone will show up and it's like an amazing performer, guitarist. I basically, I can't keep track. So
I can't either, and it's kind of what I do.
it's what you do. So yeah, but I have no professional obligation to keep track. You have a slightly higher professional
I do
obligation.
my best, as we were saying at the beginning. One does what one can.
Yeah.
Are you looking forward? Do you have anything lined up for playing? I mean, what's going on in Canada? Are you able to do any live gigging, playing?
My next live gig is not until January. I made that decision. I decided just because vaccination is going pretty well in Canada. Our numbers are coming down, but we all the summer. But we all know when all the kids go back to school in September, there's going to be a bit of a fourth wave, and things are going to go a bit wonky in the fall. So I just pushed it off till January. No, I've got a lot of projects coming up starting in 2022. I've got some with my improvisational trio. We have some small gigs. I have a big new quartet concert we're doing in January. We've commissioned 5 new composers, none of my music, 5 new composers from across Canada and 1 Australian. And then I've got another 100 guitar project coming up it's not signed yet, but probably it'll be in June here in Montreal, 100 guitar project. So I got that to do. And then I'm working on these big crazy opera projects. I have 2 other 100 guitar projects, which I'm kind of, so I've got the 100 guitar project for June 2022, which is more or less confirmed. But then I've got one in Australia, which we've been talking about for a couple of years, but COVID kind of meant I couldn't fly to Australia. So there's that. And then I have another one that I want to do in Montreal, probably in 2023. That'll, and I say I'm currently working in one way or another on 4 operas, all of which have electric guitar in them. So that's going to keep me busy. And I'm working on, that's what I was just recording. I'm working on a couple of big pieces with the contemporary choreographers. I have a piece with a choreographer named Roger Sinha, Sinha, where I'm working with my improvisational trio. So it's kind of a half improvised dance score. And then I'm working on a new piece with a young choreographer named Charles Brécard. And it's a piece mostly for solo guitar, but with 3 other guitars around the stage. And I've written all the music for that. That's mostly composed. So I'm currently actually just the past couple of weeks, I've been recording all the guitar music so the choreographer can start to hear the music and start to build his choreography about it.
Are you going to be doing any recording in, all together before January? I mean, with just like a quartet or something in a studio, or you?
No, there's no plans because as I say, we have another quartet records waiting. It's mixed, it's ready to go. I'm actually in discussion with 2 record companies, so I know it's going to come out in May 2022. I'm not. It'll depend. I'm not. After that, I'm not sure what the next big quartet project will be. Well, one of the operas is for the quartet, but that's for like 2026. I've gotten into this thing, operas, and they're like stupidly long because they're so expensive. It's like you got to fundraise $300,000. For the first one, I've managed to do it, but it's a lot of money, and so it's this very long process. But the third opera in this that I'm working on is with the quartet and 7 singers, and then this other dance piece uses the quartet. Although I'm clearly the soloist, the other 3 players are involved. But I have no idea where the quartet will go after this year. I mean, it's still going to be one of my primary mediums, but I just getting the next record out before I worry about the one after.
Are you? Who's doing the librettos for the operas?
Oh, it's one of the things. It's actually one of the things I love about opera. Having to fundraise $300,000, I don't love doing, and the endless meetings I don't love doing. But I love the research because the librettists. I'll give you some names just so you have them and the specificity. The first opera is an opera actually based, and we should eventually talk about that at some further date. It's based on Charlie Christian's performance at Carnegie Hall with Benny Goodman in 1939. So Charlie Christian's on stage and Benny Goodman's on stage. And so I found because it was so much, most of the characters on stage are Black. So I wanted to work with a Black librettist to give it a certain sense of cultural authenticity. So I found this amazing Black playwright here in Montreal, a woman named Audrey Dwyer. She's actually quite a well-known playwright and runs a major theater in Winnipeg. She wrote a stunning libretto. It was so much fun. That's what I like. That's actually the main thing I like about writing music for opera. Someone gives you 50 pages of text, and you have to just write buckets of music so that it makes sense. And I love it. It's like, oh, look what he's saying here. I can try this chord. Oh no, this phrase here. I can do these textures. It's just so much fun because you get to someone else, you get to interact with someone. It's not real time, but nonetheless, someone else is pushing you to think about music differently. And that's what I really like about opera, is where I'm given a libretto, so I can't do what I want. I have to do something that's inherently a collaboration. So that's Audrey. And then the second opera, which is based in 1970 in Montreal, there was a political crisis called the October Crisis. And there was a bunch of other things going on. But that opera starts actually September 17th, 1970. It actually starts, the first thing that happens is I play an E7 plus 9, and news clips come on announcing the death of Jimi Hendrix. So that opera, the electric guitar is everywhere in my operas. It's like pathetic. And that's a woman named Mishka Leving, who's also a very well-known, she's a bilingual, that opera is in French and English. So Mishka's working on that. And then the third opera is based in the future around climate change and the destruction of the planet, and using the First Nations indigenous metaphor of the longhouse. So I wanted to work with a First Nations playwright. So I found a woman named Yvette Nolan, who's once again quite a well-known First Nations playwright here in Canada. And the great thing about Yvette was it was a mutual contact. Someone at a festival put us together because I was talking to her. I said, oh, I'm looking for a First Nations playwright. You know, you just talk to friends, you know how people make connections. And so when I wrote to Yvette and said, oh, here's the, this libretto was about, climate change and destruction and artificial intelligence. And she kind of wrote back and said, oh, this is great. Your view of the world is even darker than mine. So there's Yvette. And then the fourth thing I'm working on, which is, I just had a meeting on it yesterday, is there was a very, I'll do show and tell a little bit more. A few years ago, this Canadian author named Madeleine Tien wrote this immense book called Do Not Say We Have Nothing. It's basically it's mostly about the history of China from the 1930s to the 2010, but it's also viewed from the perspective of a Chinese Canadian woman who had parents who she never met in China. And you look at the length, but I just about 3 years ago I said, oh, it's an impressive book. It was like shortlisted for the Booker Prize, won a huge Governor General's Award here in Canada. It's very dense, very complex. But one of the characters is a composer composing symphonies. One of the main characters plays violin, plays Ravel's Tzigane, air music. It's just music is so much part of what this is about. I decided to try and turn this into an opera, and I'm working with a Chinese Canadian playwright named Marjorie Chan, and she's just going to start, because this is the other three are like original librettos, so there's no constraints. So, but this is going to be monumental. It's basically like trying to turn War and Peace into an opera. It's going to be, my job is easy, but Marjorie has to distill this. This could be like a 7-hour opera, and we don't have the money for a set, and we don't want to. So Marjorie's going to have to somehow knock it down to 2 hours.
Is somebody going to be playing Charlie Christian's music in the Charlie Christian?
No. We might use 15 or 30 seconds at one point for a specific interest. The opera is about what was going through Charlie Christian's head. It's not about the physical reality. It's actually a fascinating libretto. The librettist came up with an amazing idea. Well, we came up with the idea together, but that Charlie, just before he's going on stage in Carnegie Hall, he has this massive panic attack and his hands start shaking. He can't really play guitar. And all of a sudden, a time traveler appears to him. And she makes him try. He goes back and meets Orville Gibson. He meets his father. He meets this very well-known club owner in Montreal, a man named Rufus Rockhead. He blasts forward to 2014 in Toronto and ends up being in a race riot in Toronto. So it's about completely what's Charlie Christian has this panic attack and just go. Well, that's the thing. Does he meet a time traveler and travel through time? Or is it just a panic attack? We never know. But no, it's not about, we're not going to have fake swing band on stage and try to play a swing opera. It's more about the psychology, and the music sounds, it's classic Brady, pretty and then not so pretty, and then pretty and then not so pretty.
Is any of it incorporating any kind of motifs from his music or anything?
We started talking about this with the production team. No, there's no specific motifs from Charlie Christian's music. Well, I do every once in a while. I use the diminished lick, and he loved the diminished, that diminished arpeggio. I'll use that every once in a while, but we all use diminished arpeggios every once in a while. To say that it's specifically from Charlie Christian would be pushing it. The thing about it, we were talking about this because most of the people involved in the opera production, they didn't know who Charlie Christian was. I had to give them a complete lesson on who Charlie Christian was. Most of them don't know much about jazz in any way, shape, or form. So I had to give, because the score, I mean, you have a very broad set of points of references. Even my notated music, you can hear that I've listened to a lot of jazz. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that jazz is very big in how I understand music. So the score is very, there's the use of modes, one of the major instruments it's a very small ensemble, only 4 instruments. It's a quartet in the ensemble, bass clarinet. Partially because I didn't feel like having regular clarinet. Secondly, because I love bass clarinet, but also because bass clarinet in Eric Dolphy is just an amazing monster. He's a beast. He's the man who basically invented bass clarinet as a solo instrument. And bass clarinet was also a hugely important instrument on Bitches Brew. So to me, using bass clarinet actually has those 2 very specific jazz influences. But you know who Eric Dolphy is, and you know what Bitches Brew is, but the people on this production are like, Eric who? So I'm having to kind of give this little The score is very jazz influenced, but not swing influenced.
Okay. Well, at least it has that. I mean, it's funny because I saw this Broadway show called The Wild Party from a great book length poem about the 20s and about that kind of stuff. And it was, I forgot why. I mean, I went because I loved that book, and Mandy Patinkin was in it. The sets were gorgeous, but the music had absolutely nothing to do with that period, you
Right.
know. And this is a musical, not an opera. So
Well, and it's musicals actually, I would say, and it's one of the differences about musicals. The music in a musical is about bringing you into the physical reality of what's happening. Whereas the theory in general, in an opera, the idea is to bring you into the psychological reality, not the physical reality. That's kind of one of the slight distinctions that Jim made. But no, the music is quite, my music sounds very rhythmic and very jazzy. But I actually decided that doing fake swing music, there's two reasons why I decided not to. To do swing music is extremely, it's based around 4-bar phrases, right? I mean, swing, pre-bebop phrasing was, it was like all about 4-bar phrases. It would have required the librettist to write everything in 4-bar phrases, which is just like a nightmare. And it just goes against the grain of what opera should be. Opera should be about mimicking human speech. So it would have been nigh on impossible to take this free verse libretto and superimpose everything on 4/4 swing bass. The other thing is, it would have felt, I'm not a swing guitarist at all. It would have felt like kind of cultural tourism. It's like, yeah, I can fake swing. I can fake swing because I know, I've listened to Freddie Green, but it wouldn't have, and it wouldn't have made people think about the psychology. They would have thought about the swing band rather than thinking about, oh, what's going through the guitar player's mind. So that's why, although my music is full of jazz references, there's not really many swing references.
well, that makes sense. I guess the question, we should probably save this. We could talk about this after the opera comes out in more detail. I guess the initial question is, what made Charlie Christian the person that you chose for the center of this?
Well, I mean, you and I are, guitar aficionados. We all know that virtually the reason any of us are doing anything nowadays is because of Charlie Christian. Historically, it's like he literally is like very few other instruments. The saxophone. Everybody knows that Adolphe Sax is why the saxophone, but nobody can say who was the first big violin player. Paganini, but now there were people before. The electric guitar has this weird, because it's such a recent instrument, we actually have fully documented every bit of history, which is very peculiar. Almost no other instrument has that. I guess synthesizers also have that. So that's one of the interesting. I'm fascinated with the fact that we live and breathe and love this instrument, which has such a short history, and we can actually pinpoint. It's very rare. I also it just struck me, one of the things for many years with my sound engineer Morris. We just talked about Charlie Christian because Morris, I mean, he has very big ears. He's listened to a lot of different music, and he knows Charlie Christian, and we talked about, and Morris is Jewish, as was Benny Goodman, and so we would talk about, like, man, being a Jewish band leader in 1939 in the States must have been a bit of a pain, but not as much of pain as being like being a black guitar player in a white band. It must just have been. And so we just talk about that for years, and eventually I realized, because we're interested in society and music and everything, we just talk about it, and eventually I realized that there was this very strong dramatic potential. What was it like to be a black guitarist in a white band in 1939, not as a musician, but in your head? Right. And so it was literally years of conversation before I realized there was dramatic potential in it. So that's kind of where it comes from. I mean, so it's not really it. And my librettist, Audrey, what was interesting when I contacted her, which was about 5 years ago, she said she had actually just started doing research as a playwright and as someone who's interested in just general things. So she had started doing research on the anxiety that black men feel because, basically they're pretty much always targeted as criminals. And so she'd been doing a lot of research and researching the psychology of stress that black males feel. And then I contacted her about, I want to do this opera about this black guy named Charlie Christian who invented the electric guitar and played with a white band. And she went, I've just been doing research on the stress of being a black male. So the opera really is more using Christian as, I mean, aside from the fact that it's just cool to do an opera about Charlie Christian, you know,
Yeah.
but it's not, it's really more about how what's that experience of being a black musician in 1939 slash 2021 or 2022. And so it's more about that. And one of the things that Audrey came up with, my librettist, there's one little section which we still haven't figured out how to pull off dramatically, but we'll find a solution. For 30 seconds in the opera, he touches the guitar, but the whole point is throughout the opera, his hands are shaking and he can't play. So there's actually a plot-driven reason why he never plays in the opera. He's having an anxiety attack. His hands are shaking. He actually can't play. So it's like a very, but this is the thing. It's a very dramatic and imaginative take on Charlie Christian, a world famous guitarist who, for the course of this opera, can't play. It's like the dramatic potential is pretty strong.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conceit, and I'll be really curious to see how you guys pull it off. And
Well, I'll let you know. I'll keep you in the loop. You know, maybe if we have some money, we can bring you up for another visit to Montreal if things are okay by next year.
yeah, I that'll just. I mean, did you say, is this the one that's going to debut in June?
No, it's going to be October 2022. So about 14 months from now. Yeah, 15 months from now.
All right, it'll still be warmer than the last time I was there, which
Oh yeah, October can actually, often October is the nicest month in Montreal.
yeah. Well, now I will just make a road trip, and it'll be fun to come up and visit, and it'll be great to see you in person again and do some hanging.
Yeah, I'd love that.